Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, dubious speculation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothe.cryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. I'm recording a lot of videos today, May 3rd, and I'm just going to be releasing them over the next few days. I'm going to be traveling, so again, apologies if you're watching this video and you're like, wait, the price looks a lot different than what Ben's looking at. Why is this? It's because I'm pre-recording a few videos. But I do want to at least provide some thoughts going into the next week or so, especially since I won't probably be able to provide any thoughts, for the next few days. One of the things that we've talked a lot about, with Bitcoin is the likelihood of sort of this death cross rally that we talked about. And again, it's not rocket science, right? I don't have a crystal ball or anything like that. It's just, we normally get rallies after death crosses. Look at 2023, look at 2024, and then, 2025 has turned out to be no different. And so far, we've seen that in 2023, once the low occurred during the death cross, that was the low for the rest of the year. Same thing in 2024. Right? It's possible, right? It's certainly possible that something like that happens in 2025, but there is some times where you have to sort of caution yourself to jump to too many conclusions, and the only reason I might caution that view, not to say that it can't happen, it certainly could, but I do, and I go back, I remember 2019 vividly, right? And the reason we go back to it is because that was, I know it wasn't a post-halving year, but I've think about how many people for the last few years have said that Bitcoin dominance goes down in halving years, because it always does. But monetary policy proved them wrong, right? Monetary policy showed that it was more important than whatever happened in prior halving years when we were in QE, right? So because of that, right, if you overlay the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve, right, if you look at total assets held by the Fed, you can see that 2019 was when QT was going on, right? And it was only after QE began that really Bitcoin started to get this other parabolic rally, when Bitcoin dominance really started to go down. And that was sort of at the tail end of that rally. But in that period, when QT ended, you had a rally by Bitcoin around the time of the death cross, but then it ultimately led to a lower low about a month later. And the reason why I go back to that is because this level for Bitcoin, I still contend, is a very critical level, right? And the reason I say that is because this is the level in 2019 at which Bitcoin faded. It basically swept the high from where it broke down from. And this is the thing, and this is why I said back when we were going to get a death cross rally, we'll talk about it in a minute, but if you look at the 2019 rally by Bitcoin, you see where it ultimately rallied back up to after the death cross. Right? So I don't know why I took it off, but if you look at the death cross, it basically swept this high, right? It swept that high from where it broke down from, and then it came back down and then somehow set a lower low, right? And you might say, well, that time's different. And it very well could be, right? I'm not suggesting that it has to be the same, but just keep in mind that the market sold off just before the death cross and then rallied. And when it rallied, the market actually rallied like 42% and still put in a lower low, a month after the rally began. And today, we haven't even seen Bitcoin rally as much, right? I mean, it's only rallied like 30%. And I just want to remind people that, it is a possibility. So if you're looking for something that would make you think like, oh, this is not just going to lead to a slightly lower low like 2019, or like what happened over here in 2024, right, where you had, a series of lower lows and lower highs, right? You had these lower highs, you had lower lows, and you spent a lot of your time sort of the midpoint of that channel. How is it different than 2019? Well, it needs to stay above this level. That's what I've said, right? And what I'd like to see a suggestion that it's different than 2019 is what I told you guys last two videos, for anyone who cared to watch, right, is that it'd be nice to have a weekly close above 96.5K. Above 96.5K. Now, again, I don't know exactly when I'm going to release this video. Maybe I'll release this one of the first two, but by the time you're watching this video, it's possible the weekly close is already in. A weekly close above 96.5 would probably go a long way in helping to say, look, this is not exactly like 2019. Because in 2019, We did not get a weekly close above the level. You see this? You see where Bitcoin broke down from? This big candle right here? No weekly closes above that level. None. Can we get a weekly close above where this big, because this was the massive drop occurred, right? This was this candle. It dropped, and then we came back up, and then it dropped again the following week. Can you get a weekly close above that candle? In 2019, we could not. Can we in 2025? If we can in 2025, then what it would suggest, especially if you get 2 weekly candles, what it would suggest is that it's different than 2019. If it fades and this is just a sweep of the high, then you at least have to wonder. Now, I don't know what the narrative would be that would bring Bitcoin back down. The only thing, the only real thing I can think of in the short term that a lot of people might buy into is we have an inflation data point coming up in a couple of weeks. And given all the tariffs and whatnot, and given all the price increases that we've seen, there's a non-negligible chance that the next inflation print is just a big one, right? And it just is above expectations, and it's somewhat artificial because it's not because of supply chain issues or anything like that. It's just because we said, okay, this is going to cost twice as much now, right? So if that's the case, and inflation gives you a bad print, that could be the narrative, right? That could be the narrative that brings it back down. I hope not, right? I hope not. But that would be the thing. Now, if you're wondering how do you prepare yourself for something like that, as I've said and as I've always will say, for those in crypto, you're better off with Bitcoin than the altcoin market. Whenever we get to sufficiently looser monetary policy, I might change my mind. But until that time, Bitcoin's a better play. It gives you exposure to the upside in case it's not 2019. And if it's just a repeat of 2023 and 2024, where we just scream higher, Bitcoin gives you exposure. It also minimizes your downside risk, because if Bitcoin dominance, or if Bitcoin USD drops, Bitcoin dominance will likely go up. If you actually overlay Bitcoin dominance to Bitcoin USD, right? If you overlay it, you can see that when the Fed announced a slowdown to QT back in May of 2024, right here, right? When they announced that at the very beginning of May, right there, it was like, I think it was like early May, yeah. You can see that Bitcoin also got a rally, right? It got a big rally back up. And before Bitcoin dominance topped, again, Bitcoin dominance sort of found a short-term top, but you can see that Bitcoin dominance just continued to do well, right? I mean, it went up, and then it came back down, but then it did go back up again, right? It went back up again, and then ultimately went much, much higher as the cycle continued. But the point is that throughout this entire consolidation phase, Bitcoin dominance generally went up. In 2023, during the consolidation phase, Bitcoin dominance generally went up. So you basically had the 2023 consolidation, dominance went up. The 2024 consolidation, dominance went up. And now the 2025. And guess what? Dominance is going up. So it just seems to me that if you want to take on the risk in crypto, Bitcoin gives you exposure to the upside. It minimizes your downside risk. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't go down. It just means that for every unit risk you're taking on, you expect, some level of reward. Hopefully you get it. You might not. The last 2 years you did. It's not clear if you always, it's not like you always necessarily will. But Bitcoin is a safer play than the altcoin market. If Bitcoin goes up, altcoins probably go up too, but not as much. If Bitcoin goes down, altcoins will likely drop more. So the problem for alts is that in order for them to go up, it's like it requires Bitcoin to go up first. That's the problem for alts. And if Bitcoin is required to go up before alts, for alts to go up, why hold altcoins over Bitcoin? That's the problem. Especially when you look at the chart we've looked at forever, alt Bitcoin pairs. And you look at a chart like this, you're like, well, it seems like the most likely outcome is alts are going to bleed back to Bitcoin, which means altcoins will likely drop, another 28, 8% against Bitcoin. So, you know, Bitcoin right now is at a sort of at a major crossroads, and I'm looking at it at this 2019 view here, and saying, look, if this is 2019, then this is exactly where Bitcoin's going to fade. That's exactly where it would fade. I found another pattern in the charts that kind of looked like this. Might have been right here. Yeah. So there was this thing here. So if you look at after the death cross in 2024, it actually did. We did not put in a lower low. But what you'll notice is that there was some consolidation. And then on a Thursday, a big move up. Look at this. Consolidation. Do you care to guess what that green candle there is? What day it occurred? Oh, on a Thursday. Just like that one. On a Thursday. And then it went up on Friday too. Right? Went up on Friday too. And then over the weekend, it started to reverse course. You see that? Over the weekend, it started to reverse course. And then what happened when Monday arrived and Tuesday, Bitcoin dropped back down to the 50-day moving average. Well, the 50-day moving average right now is all the way back down at like 87K. Right? I mean, it's 86, 87K. That would be a pretty big drop if it were to drop back down to that level. That's the level I'm saying keep an eye on if it does play out like what happened over here. Keep an eye on that 50-day moving average. Now, remember, in 2019, what happened? It also fell back down to the 50-day moving average, and it found support for a few days, but ultimately it lost it. So I'm looking at it and thinking, all right, well, if there is a drop, guess what? Bitcoin dominance is going to shoot up, because anytime Bitcoin starts to sneeze over here, the altcoin market, you know, gets taken to the hospital for a week. Because there's just no liquidity, you know. If Bitcoin coughs, the altcoin market just gets annihilated. If Bitcoin goes back down here, we'll probably be at 66% dominance already. We'll see. If it's not always, sometimes you'll see Bitcoin drop and then dominance doesn't immediately go up, and then it'll go up like a few days later, as sort of liquidity for altcoins is just not there. But keep an eye on this for Bitcoin, because if this is just a sweep of the high, you would expect it to basically go back down to that 50-day moving average like it did in 2024 and try to find support. And there's a chance that's all this is. I mean, even if you take a look at a bar pattern, if you look at a bar pattern on here, like I can never remember where this stuff is. But yeah, like if you go look at a bar pattern, I think it's on a log scale. And you look, say, like at some of these prior trends, like look at this one. For after the death cross, we've significantly outperformed it so far this time. But you can see that there was a pullback around this time. There was a pullback. Even if you go look at before the death cross, right? And you take that pattern from that low. A very similar thing, right? A very similar thing, and then this is kind of where it dropped into a lower low. If you look at 2019, and you take this pattern, right? If you take this pattern right here, and you bring it over to today, right? You can kind of see what I'm talking about. That one back then lasted, didn't last nearly as long, but it still somehow put in a new low in mid-May. By the way, mid-May is when we're going to get the next inflation print. So, you know, I look at this stuff and I don't, you know, I know a lot of people just wish I would just permabull post and do nothing other than that. But to be completely honest, I mean, like, if Bitcoin goes up, great, right? I mean, a lot of people at this point are probably on the Bitcoin dominance train. But you have to remember that there's a lot of people out there that are just going to bull post nonstop, no matter what happens. I mean, Bitcoin could drop 50% tomorrow, and they'll just pretend like they were ready for it, even though they were bull posting nonstop beforehand. Just remember, like, I'm just trying to provide some type of reasonable analysis. And sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. I just think that it's important to look at some of these prior trends to get an idea of what could happen. I'm not saying that it tells you exactly what's going to happen, but it tells you what to be aware of in the case of pullbacks. If there's a pullback, the 50-day moving average is going to come into play, more than likely. And if you get a bad inflation print, you probably wouldn't even see the 50-day SMA hold. So it probably depends on where that actually comes in at. But we'll see. We'll see what Bitcoin does here. I suppose there's always a chance that you still get a weekly close above 96.5K. But so far, this is kind of turning around just like it did back in sort of turning around just like it did right there, right? And it sort of pumped into the weekend, and then it sort of faded the following week. So, something to keep in mind. Also, if you haven't noticed, a lot of times when I'm out of town, the market does drop, actually. I don't know why, but it does seem to happen. In fact, I sort of a joke with people on ITC Premium Law. I'm like, guys, the only indicator we need to put on the website is just when it's been out of town, because normally the market is going crazy during that time. A lot of times it's dropping. Occasionally it's pumping like crazy. But the reason I feel like it does it is because I can't talk about it. So what better time than the Cryptoverse to go crazy is when I can't actually provide my commentary on it. And as far as I'm concerned, right, it's somewhat of a, sort of just viewing it from my perspective. But like back over here, I was actually out of town in when was it? It was like right here. I was out of town in that period. And the reason why that was big was because that was when the stock market was getting annihilated. Right? Bitcoin went down, and it did eventually go into a new low. Right? And so, yeah, but I was out of town. Also, this wick right here in August 2024, I was also out of town. And I'm actually going on a very similar trip as that one. Fortunately, we're not, it doesn't look like we're, it doesn't look as, it's not the same setup, because back then we had the Bank of Japan raising rates as well. We had the unwind of the carry trade. But, I mean, it's certainly something to think about here. So, I know another one. This was when it was bullish, because I was very bearish on ETH Bitcoin back in 2022. I turned bearish on it right here, and I came back down. I felt like a genius. And then I was sort of celebrating my awesome trade. And then I went out of town like right here, and then ETH Bitcoin ripped me a new one, right? It ripped me a new one. I was like, what do I do? But yeah, we'll see what happens. That's your Bitcoin dubious speculation. And, the next few weeks should be really interesting. If Bitcoin can somehow get weekly closes up here, then we'll talk about it. Right? We'll talk about it. But let's see what happens over the next few days and over the next week or two. And we'll take it from there. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. And again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothe-cryptoverse.com. By the way, the Las Vegas conference is coming up soon for the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas, I should say. It's coming up relatively soon. Hope to see a lot of you guys there. It's only right in a few weeks, like the end of May. So make sure you guys check that out. And I hope to see you there. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.